cold bit through my thin jacket as I hurried down the street. Late October in Chicago wasn't kind to those who couldn't afford proper winter clothes, and I was definitely in that category. 3 months behind on rent, working 2 jobs that barely covered groceries, and still paying off medical bills from last year's emergency appendectomy. I was drowning, but somehow still breathing. My breath fogged in front of me as I left the diner where I'd just finished a 12-hour shift. The smell of grease clung to my hair and uniform, a scent I couldn't seem to wash out no matter how many showers I took. My feet ached, my lower back throbbed, and all I wanted was to collapse into my bed, even if it was just a lumpy mattress on the floor of my studio apartment. The bus stop was 2 blocks away, and I quickened my pace. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't the kind of place where a woman wanted to linger alone after dark. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting strange, elongated shadows across the cracked sidewalk. Music thumped from a bar as I passed, and a couple stumbled out, laughing too loudly, the woman clutching the man's arm as if she might float away without his weight to anchor her. I kept my head down, the way I always did, invisible. That's how I preferred to move through the world these days. Ever since David had left me with nothing but debt and broken promises, I'd learned that being noticed usually meant being hurt. The sound caught my attention first. A small, choked sob coming from the alley between a closed bodega and a laundromat. I hesitated, my instinct for self-preservation warring with my inability to ignore someone in distress. Another sob. Definitely a child. My feet moved before my brain could catch up. "Hello?" I called softly, peering into the shadows. "Is someone there?" At first, nothing. Then a shuffling sound, and a small figure emerged partially from behind a dumpster. A boy. Couldn't be more than 7 or 8, with dark hair and enormous brown eyes swimming with tears. His expensive-looking coat was smudged with dirt. One knee of his jeans torn. "Are you okay?" I asked, crouching down to his level, but keeping enough distance not to frighten him. He shook his head, lower lip trembling. "I'm lost," he whispered, his voice accented. "Italian, maybe? I can't find my way home." "Where's your mom or dad?" I asked, looking around as if an anxious parent might materialize from the shadows. "Papa is at work. Nonna was watching me at the park, but I saw a puppy and followed it." Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "Now, I don't know where I am, and it's dark. And I'm scared." Something in my chest cracked open. I'd spent so long building walls around myself that I'd forgotten what it felt like to care about someone else's problems, but this was a child, a lost, frightened little boy who needed help. "My name's Ellie," I said gently. "What's yours?" "Marco?" he replied, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Well, Marco, I'm going to help you find your way home, okay? Do you know your address or your phone number?" He nodded, reciting an address in Gold Coast, one of Chicago's wealthiest neighborhoods. This kid definitely came from money. The thought flashed through my mind that I could be walking into some kind of trap, but I dismissed it. My paranoia was getting the better of me again. "That's a bit far from here. We'll need to take a bus," I explained. "Is that okay?" Marco nodded solemnly, and when I held out my hand, he took it without hesitation. His small fingers were ice cold, and I felt a surge of protectiveness. We walked to the bus stop together, Marco's grip tightening every time a car passed or someone walked by. I found myself scanning the streets, suddenly hyper-aware of our surroundings in a way I hadn't been when it was just me. On the bus, Marco sat close to me, his shoulder pressed against my arm. He told me about the puppy, a small white one with a brown spot shaped like a heart on its back. How he'd just wanted to pet it, but it kept running away. How he'd suddenly looked up and realized his grandmother wasn't there anymore. How he'd tried to find his way back, but had gotten more and more lost. "Papa's going to be so mad," he whispered, fresh tears threatening. "I'm sure he'll just be relieved you're safe," I said, though I had no idea if that was true. Rich parents could be just as terrible as poor ones, sometimes worse. As we approached Gold Coast, the buildings grew taller, cleaner, more imposing. Marco perked up, recognizing his neighborhood. He led me confidently now, turning down streets lined with high-end boutiques and expensive restaurants, all closed for the night, but still gleaming with subtle, tasteful lighting. We stopped in front of a towering residential building with a doorman and a marble entrance. My stomach clenched. I suddenly felt painfully aware of my waitress uniform, the grease stains on my shoes, the fact that I probably smelled like French fries and coffee. "This is where you live?" I asked, my voice small. Marco nodded, already pulling me toward the entrance. The doorman straightened instantly, his eyes widening as he recognized the boy. "Master Marco, thank God!" he exclaimed, then spoke urgently into a radio clipped to his lapel. "He's here, sir." "Yes, at the front entrance." Within moments, the glass doors burst open, and a woman with silver-streaked dark hair rushed out, crying Marco's name. She swept him into her arms, rapid Italian flowing between them as she checked him over for injuries, her hands framing his face. I stood awkwardly to the side, suddenly feeling like an intruder. I should just slip away, I thought. My job was done. The boy was home safe. But as I turned to leave, Marco called out, "Ellie, wait!" He broke away from the woman and grabbed my hand. "This is Ellie," he told the woman, presumably his grandmother. "She found me and brought me home." The woman, Nonna, looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," she said, her accent thick. "Thank you for bringing our boy home." She clutched my hands, and I noticed an enormous diamond ring on her finger that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. "It was no problem," I said, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I'm glad he's safe." "You must come up," she insisted. "Alessandro will want to thank you personally." "Oh no, really, that's not necessary," I protested. "I should get home. It's late and—" But Marco was already tugging on my hand, his earlier fear replaced with childish enthusiasm. "Please, Ellie, please come up. I want to show you my room and my toys and—" "Marco!" A deep voice interrupted from the doorway. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I turned to see a man standing in the entrance of the building, backlit by the lobby's chandelier so that his face was in shadow. But even without seeing his features clearly, I felt the power radiating from him, in his stance, in the cut of what was obviously an extremely expensive suit, in the way both the doorman and Nonna straightened in his presence. "Papa!" Marco cried, breaking away from his grandmother to run to the man. The man crouched down, gathering Marco into his arms with a fierceness that surprised me. For a moment, just a moment, I glimpsed vulnerability in the set of his shoulders, the way his hand cradled the back of Marco's head. Then he straightened, and it was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. He stepped forward into the light, and my breath caught. He was beautiful in the way predators are beautiful, all sleek lines and dangerous grace. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, sharp cheekbones, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to giving orders than smiles, but it was his eyes that trapped me. Dark as midnight and just as fathomless, they assessed me with an intensity that made me feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. "You found my son," he said, his voice a low rumble with the barest hint of an accent. I swallowed hard. Yes. He was lost. I just helped him get home." Those eyes narrowed slightly, searching my face for something. Most people in this city would have walked right by. Or worse. I shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not most people, I guess." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." The moment stretched between us, taut as a wire. Behind him, I noticed 2 men in dark suits standing at a discreet distance, their posture alert, hands hidden inside their jackets. Security? For a residential building? It seemed excessive, but what did I know about how the ultra-wealthy lived? "Papa, can Ellie come up, please?" Marco asked, breaking the tension. The man, Alessandro, Nonna had called him, didn't take his eyes off me. "Of course. We owe Ms. Ellie," I supplied. "Ellie Foster. Ms. Foster our gratitude, and I never leave a debt unpaid." Something in the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. "Really? It's fine. I should go." I took a step back, suddenly overwhelmed by the intensity of his gaze, by the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand. "I insist," Alessandro said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. "Just a coffee. to thank you properly for returning my son. I should have said no. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to walk away, but Marco was looking up at me with those big, hopeful eyes, and I found myself nodding against my better judgment. 1 coffee, I agreed. Alessandro's smile didn't reach his eyes. Excellent. As we entered the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake, that in helping a lost child find his way home, I'd somehow lost my own way instead. The elevator was mirrored, with gold accents and soft lighting that made even my tired face look somewhat presentable. We rode in silence, Marco still clutching my hand on one side and his father's on the other, creating a strange tableau in the reflection. The dirty waitress, the wealthy businessman, and the child connecting them. When the doors opened, I stepped into another world. The penthouse apartment sprawled before me, all gleaming hardwood, cream-colored furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Chicago's glittering skyline. A crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across the walls. The place was bigger than the entire floor of apartments where I lived. Wow! I breathed before I could stop myself. Alessandro watched me, his expression unreadable. Marco, go with Nonna to get cleaned up. Then bed. But Papa... Marco began to protest. Now, Marco. It's late and you've caused enough trouble for one evening. His voice was firm but not unkind. Marco's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. Yes, Papa. He turned to me, wrapping his arms around my waist in a sudden hug that took me by surprise. Thank you for bringing me home, Ellie. I awkwardly patted his back, unused to such displays of affection. You're welcome, Marco. Be more careful next time, okay? With a nod, he let his grandmother lead him away, leaving me alone with Alessandro and the 2 men who had followed us up, but now positioned themselves discreetly by the elevator. Coffee? Alessandro asked, gesturing toward what I assumed was the kitchen. Sure, I said, though caffeine was the last thing I needed at... I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. I followed him through the apartment, acutely aware of the squeak of my non-slip work shoes against the polished floor. The kitchen was a chef's dream, all stainless steel and marble, with copper pots hanging from a rack overhead. Alessandro moved with easy confidence, preparing an espresso machine that looked more complicated than my car. So, he said as he worked, his back to me. You found Marco in an alley near Franklin and Adams, I replied. I was heading home from work. He turned, his eyes flicking over my uniform. The diner on Wabash? I blinked, surprised. Yes, how did you know? His lips curved in that almost smile again. The logo, he said, nodding to the small embroidered pancake on my shirt pocket. But something in his tone made me wonder if there was more to it. The espresso machine hissed, breaking the moment. Alessandro placed a small, delicate cup in front of me, the coffee inside dark as pitch. Thank you, I murmured, taking a sip. It was rich and complex, nothing like the watered-down brew we served at the diner. No, he said quietly, leaning against the counter opposite me, his own cup untouched. Thank you. Marco is... He paused, something flickering across his face. He's everything to me. For the first time, I saw past the wealth, the power, the intimidating presence to the father who'd been afraid for his child. It humanized him in a way that made him somehow more dangerous to me. He seems like a great kid, I offered. He is. Alessandro studied me over the rim of his cup. And you? Do you have children, Miss Foster? Ellie? I corrected automatically. And no. No children. No husband. No pets. Not even a houseplant at the moment. I laughed nervously, wishing I could take back the overshare. A woman like you should have more, he said, his gaze direct and penetrating. I shifted uncomfortably. A woman like me? Kind, he elaborated. Brave, beautiful. The last word hung in the air between us. I felt my cheeks heat and dropped my gaze to my coffee cup, unsure how to respond. When I looked up again, Alessandro was closer, though I hadn't heard him move. I'd like to repay you, he said, for helping Marco. That's really not necessary, I protested. I disagree. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. Please, allow me to... No, I said firmly, setting down my cup with a clatter. I don't want your money. I didn't help your son because I expected payment. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Alessandro stilled, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he was reassessing me. I've offended you. No, I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Look, it's been a long day. I should go. I stood, smoothing down my wrinkled uniform. I'm glad Marco is home safe. That's all the reward I need. As I turned to leave, Alessandro's voice stopped me. Wait. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. At least let me call you a car, he said. It's late and the buses will be infrequent. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay, thank you. His fingers brushed mine as he handed me a business card. My personal number, he explained. If you change your mind about allowing me to show my gratitude, call me. I tucked the card into my pocket without looking at it, certain I would never use it. Good night, Mr. Russo, he supplied. Alessandro Russo. Good night, Mr. Russo. As the elevator doors closed between us, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The tension drained from my shoulders, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I leaned against the mirrored wall, replaying the strange evening in my mind. I had no way of knowing then that my impulsive decision to help a lost child would change my life forever, that the business card burning a hole in my pocket was my first step toward a world I could never have imagined. That Alessandro Russo was not just a wealthy, overprotective father, but something far more dangerous, and that by morning, he would know everything about me. I woke to pounding on my door. For a moment, I lay disoriented in the gray morning light, filtering through my thin curtains, wondering if I'd dreamed it. Then it came again. 3 sharp, authoritative knocks that made my heart leap into my throat. Coming, I called, scrambling out of bed. I glanced at the clock, 6:43 a.m. Who would be at my door this early? I pulled on a robe over my pajamas and peered through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside, his expression impassive. Not my landlord, and definitely not someone I knew. My first thought was debt collector, and my stomach dropped. Who is it? I asked, my voice wavering slightly. Ms. Foster, I have a delivery for you from Mr. Russo. Alessandro Russo. The events of the previous night came flooding back. The lost boy, the penthouse apartment, the intimidating father with eyes that seemed to see right through me. I hesitated, then unlatched the door but kept the chain on, opening it just enough to see the man's face. Mr. Russo asked me to deliver this, the man said, holding up a small gift bag with tissue paper spilling from the top, and to convey his appreciation for your assistance with his son. My first instinct was to refuse it, but the man's expression made it clear he wasn't leaving until I accepted. I closed the door, unhooked the chain, and opened it fully. Thank you, I said stiffly, taking the bag. The man nodded, then added, Mr. Russo also asked me to inform you that a car will be waiting outside at 7:30 p.m. tomorrow evening, should you wish to join him for dinner. What? No, I can't. The invitation stands, regardless of your answer now. Good day, Ms. Foster. Before I could protest further, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing bewildered in my doorway. I closed the door and leaned against it, staring at the gift bag in my hands. It was heavy, made of thick, expensive paper with a satin ribbon handle. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reached inside, pushing aside the tissue paper. My fingers touched something smooth and rectangular. I pulled it out and gasped. It was a first edition of Jane Eyre, my favorite book. The one I'd mentioned to Marco during our bus ride when he'd asked what I liked to read. But how had Alessandro known? Had Marco told him? The book had to be worth thousands of dollars. My hands trembled as I carefully opened the cover, and a small note card fell out. In elegant handwriting, it read, "A small token of appreciation for returning my most precious possession, safely, home, AR." I set the book down as if it might burn me. This wasn't just a thank you gift. It was too personal, too expensive. And how had he known where I lived? I hadn't given him my address. The thought sent a chill through me. I hurried to my tiny window and peered down at the street below. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just the usual morning traffic and pedestrians hurrying to work. But the feeling of being watched lingered. I set the book on my small kitchen table and got ready for my shift at the coffee shop, my morning job before the diner. As I moved through my cramped apartment, my eyes kept returning to the book, to the elegant script of the note. to the invitation that hung in the air. I should throw the book away, I thought, or sell it. God knew I could use the money, but I couldn't bring myself to do either. The day passed in a blur of coffee orders and rude customers. By the time I started my shift at the diner, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I moved mechanically, taking orders, delivering food, plastering on a fake smile for tips. It was during my dinner break that Meg, one of the other waitresses, slid into the booth across from me, her eyes wide. "So," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "when were you going to tell me?" I looked up from my cold fries, confused. "Tell you what?" She rolled her eyes. "About your secret boyfriend, obviously. The one who sent you that massive flower arrangement that just arrived. What are you talking about? I don't have a boyfriend." Meg grabbed my arm and pulled me to the front of the diner. Sitting on the counter was the largest floral arrangement I'd ever seen. Roses, lilies, and orchids in a crystal vase that probably cost more than a week's worth of my salary. "That's not for me," I said, even as my stomach sank with the certainty that it was. "Card says Ellie Foster," the hostess confirmed, holding out a small envelope. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was another elegantly handwritten note. "The invitation for dinner still stands. 7:30 p.m. tomorrow. A.R." "Well?" Meg prompted, practically bouncing with curiosity. "Who's A.R.?" "Nobody," I said quickly, tucking the card into my pocket. "Just someone I helped out." "Uh-huh," Meg said skeptically. "Nobody sends flowers like that as a thank you, Ellie." Spill, but I couldn't explain. How could I tell her that a man I'd just met, a man who radiated power and danger, who lived in a penthouse and had security guards, was pursuing me? It sounded insane even in my own head. "It's complicated," I finally said. "I helped his son last night, and he's just grateful." "His son?" Meg's eyebrows shot up. "Is he single?" "I don't know. I didn't ask." But I had noticed the absence of a wife, the absence of any female presence except the grandmother. No pictures of a mother in the parts of the apartment I'd seen. "Well, are you going?" "To the dinner," Meg pressed. I shook my head firmly. "No, it's inappropriate. I barely know him." But even as I said it, I felt a traitor whisper in the back of my mind. What if I did go? What would it be like to dine with Alessandro Russo? To be the focus of those intense dark eyes for an entire evening? Dangerous. That's what it would be. I finished my shift and headed home, the weight of the decision pressing on me. The rational part of me knew I should stay far away from Alessandro Russo. But another part, a part I'd thought long buried after David's betrayal, was curious, intrigued. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. I kept expecting more gifts, more notes, but nothing came. By the time I returned to my apartment at 6:45 p.m., I'd convinced myself that the whole thing had been some strange dream, or that Alessandro Russo had lost interest in his pursuit. I stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the lingering scent of the diner. As I dried off, my eyes fell on the first edition still sitting on my table, the flowers I'd brought home from the diner now arranged in a chipped mug beside it. Before I could overthink it, I opened my closet and pulled out the one nice dress I owned, a simple black number I'd worn to my mother's funeral 2 years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and fit me well. "This is insane," I muttered to myself as I applied mascara, a touch of blush. "You're not actually going to do this." But at 7:25 p.m., I found myself standing at the window, watching as a sleek black car pulled up outside my building. The same man who had delivered the book stepped out, looking up at my window as if he knew I was watching. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The car is waiting. AR." I took a deep breath and made my decision. When I stepped outside, the man opened the car door for me without a word. The interior was luxurious. Soft leather seats, the scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. As we pulled away from the curb, I had the distinct feeling I was crossing a threshold, leaving behind the safety of my small, predictable life. The restaurant was in the heart of downtown, its entrance discreet, but unmistakably exclusive. I was led through a dimly lit dining room to a private section in the back. And there he was, standing as I approached, those dark eyes taking in every detail of my appearance. "You came," Alessandro said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. "I was curious," I admitted, allowing him to pull out my chair. "Curious about what?" he asked, resuming his seat across from me. "About you," I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I gestured vaguely, about why all this interest in a waitress who did what anyone would have done. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "We both know that's not true. Most people would have walked past my son. Or worse. You have a very cynical view of humanity, Mr. Russo. Alessandro, please." He reached for the wine, pouring me a glass without asking. "And my view is not cynical, merely realistic. I've seen the worst of what people are capable of." There was something in his tone that made me pause, something hard and cold beneath the smooth exterior. Before I could respond, a waiter appeared, reciting the evening's specials in French. I felt hopelessly out of my depth. Alessandro ordered for both of us, his French flawless. When the waiter left, I raised an eyebrow at him. "I can order for myself, you know," I said, a touch of defiance in my voice. "Of course you can," he agreed easily. "But the chef here prepares certain dishes specially for me that aren't on the menu. I thought you might enjoy them." I sipped my wine, unsure how to respond. It was the most expensive wine I'd ever tasted, rich and complex on my tongue. "Tell me about yourself, Ellie Foster," Alessandro said, his eyes never leaving my face. "There's not much to tell. I work 2 jobs. I live in a tiny apartment. I read when I can find the time." I shrugged. "I'm ordinary." "No," he said with surprising firmness. "You're not ordinary at all." He leaned forward slightly. "You have no family?" The question caught me off guard. "My mother died 2 years ago. Heart attack. My father left when I was 3. I barely remember him." "So you're alone in the world." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, uncomfortable with how accurately he'd summarized my situation. "What about you?" I asked, desperate to shift the focus. Is Marco's mother?" A shadow crossed his face. "Sophia died when Marco was 2. Cancer." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "It was a long time ago." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. The dinner progressed with a strange intensity, each course more exquisite than the last. Alessandro watched me as I tasted each new dish, a peculiar satisfaction in his eyes when I couldn't suppress my pleasure at the flavors. "You should eat like this every day," he remarked, refilling my wine glass. I laughed softly. "On a waitress's salary, I'm lucky if I can afford fresh vegetables once a week. That could change," he said, his voice dropping lower. The implication hung in the air between us, unmistakable. I set down my fork, suddenly losing my appetite. "Why am I here, Alessandro? Really?" His dark eyes studied me, calculating. "Because you intrigue me. You don't know me." "I know more than you think." He took a sip of his wine. "I know you grew up in Indianapolis with a single mother who worked as a nurse. I know you got a partial scholarship to Northwestern, but dropped out in your junior year when your mother got sick. I know your ex-boyfriend left you with $30,000 in debt from a failed restaurant venture you foolishly co-signed for." Ice spread through my veins. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know everything about people who enter my life, Ellie." His tone was casual, as if discussing the weather, not the invasion of my privacy. "I haven't entered your life," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I helped your son, that's all." Alessandro leaned forward, his eyes capturing mine. "Yet here you are, having dinner with me." I pushed my chair back, ready to flee, but his hand shot out, gently but firmly grasping my wrist. His touch sent an electric current up my arm, and I froze. "Don't go," he said, his voice softer now. "Please. I've made you uncomfortable, and that wasn't my intention." "What was your intention?" I whispered. He released my wrist, sitting back. "To know you. To understand why a woman with nothing would help a child she didn't know, expecting nothing in return. It's unusual in my experience." "It's called basic human decency," I said, still on edge. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps that's why you fascinate me. Decency is rare in my world." "And what world is that exactly?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had been nagging at me since we met. Alessandro's expression shuddered, becoming unreadable. I'm a businessman, Ellie. Import, export, primarily. It was clearly not the whole truth, but I didn't press. The way his security detail hovered nearby, the way the restaurant staff treated him with a mixture of deference and fear, the way he carried himself. All of it spoke of someone accustomed to power, to being obeyed without question. I should go, I said, placing my napkin beside my plate. Have I frightened you? He asked, sounding genuinely curious. Yes, I admitted. But not for the reasons you might think. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. I'm afraid because part of me likes this, I said, gesturing to the restaurant, the wine, him, and I know better. Men like you don't just take an interest in women like me without a reason. Alessandro studied me for a long moment. You think I want something from you. Don't you? Yes, he said simply. But perhaps not what you imagine. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. I need to take this, he said, standing. Please, finish your dessert. I'll be right back. As he walked away, speaking rapid Italian into his phone, I had the sudden urge to run, to get up and walk out of the restaurant, to disappear back into my small, safe life. But something kept me rooted to my seat. Curiosity, maybe, or something more dangerous. Alessandro returned a few minutes later, his face composed, but tension radiating from him like heat. I apologize, but I need to cut our evening short, he said, his tone clipped. A business matter requires my immediate attention. Relief mingled with disappointment. Of course, I understand. The car will take you home, he said, signaling for the check without looking at it. And Ellie? Yes? I'd like to see you again. It wasn't quite a question, but neither was it a command. I hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. Because I frighten you? Because whatever this is, I gestured between us, it isn't real. We're from different worlds, Alessandro. This was a curiosity for you, nothing more. Something flickered in his eyes, anger, frustration, but was quickly masked. You underestimate yourself, he said softly. And me. Outside, the same black car waited. Alessandro opened the door for me, his hand brushing mine as I slipped past him. Good night, Ellie Foster, he said, his breath warm against my ear. Good night, Alessandro, I replied, not meeting his eyes, afraid of what I might see there or what he might see in mine. As the car pulled away, I glanced back to see him still standing on the curb, watching me leave, his tall figure imposing in the glow of the streetlights. The image stayed with me as the car wound through Chicago's streets, back to my reality. My apartment felt smaller than ever when I returned. The shabby furniture and peeling wallpaper a stark contrast to the luxury I'd just experienced. I kicked off my heels and sank onto my bed, my mind racing. The smart thing to do would be to forget Alessandro Russo existed. To return to my routine, to the safety of anonymity, but as I drifted off to sleep, his dark eyes followed me into my dreams. I woke the next morning determined to put the strange interlude behind me. I had the early shift at the coffee shop, followed by a double at the diner. No time for daydreams about mysterious businessmen. The coffee shop was busier than usual, a line stretching out the door. I moved on autopilot, taking orders, making change, forcing smiles for customers who barely looked at me. It wasn't until mid-morning that I noticed him, one of Alessandro's security men, sitting in the corner with a newspaper he wasn't reading. My hands shook as I made the next latte, spilling milk on the counter. He wasn't even trying to be discreet. When our eyes met, he nodded slightly, making it clear he was there for me to see. I managed to get through the rest of my shift without incident, but the feeling of being watched followed me to the diner. There, a different man sat at the counter, nursing a coffee for 3 hours, watching, waiting. By the time I left work, my nerves were frayed to breaking point. I burst through the door of my apartment, locking it behind me, then froze. On my kitchen table sat a large manila envelope that hadn't been there when I left. My window was closed and locked. My door had shown no signs of forced entry, yet someone had been in my home. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of papers, bank statements, loan documents, legal forms, and a note in now familiar handwriting. Consider it erased. A.R. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me, as I realized what I was looking at. Every debt in my name, the student loans, the restaurant loan David had left me with, the medical bills from my mother's final illness and my own emergency surgery, all of it marked, paid in full. My phone buzzed with a text, no strings attached, an actual gift, not a debt to be repaid. A.R. I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. The amount he'd paid off represented years of struggle for me, yet it was probably pocket change to him. The inequality of it made me feel small, helpless, but also, undeniably, relieved. Another text came through. Have dinner with me again, tomorrow. Because you want to, not because you feel obligated. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My emotions were too tangled. Gratitude warring with resentment, relief with suspicion, attraction with fear. I fell asleep with my phone clutched in my hand, no closer to an answer. The next day passed without any sign of Alessandro or his men. No texts, no gifts, no surveillance. By evening, I found myself checking my phone repeatedly, a hollow feeling in my chest that I refused to name as disappointment. At 7:15 p.m., a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Marco standing there, flanked by the ever-present security, beaming up at me. "Ellie," he exclaimed, throwing his arms around my waist. "I missed you." "Marco? What are you doing here?" I looked over his head at the security men, who remained impassive. "Papa said I could come invite you to dinner myself," Marco explained, his brown eyes, so like his father's, wide with excitement. "He said you might say yes to me even if you said no to him." I couldn't help but laugh at Alessandro's strategy. "Did he now?" Marco nodded solemnly. "He's been grumpy ever since our dinner got cut short. Nana says he's lovesick, but I think he just likes you a lot, like I do." My heart twisted at his innocent assessment. "Marco, it's complicated." "Please?" he wheedled, giving me a look that could melt stone. "Papa made the chef prepare American food tonight because he said you might be tired of fancy stuff. We're having burgers." The image of Alessandro Russo eating a burger was so incongruous that I laughed again. "Burgers, huh? With all the toppings and milkshakes!" I knelt down to Marco's level, studying his eager face. "Did your dad tell you to use your cuteness against me?" Marco grinned mischievously. "Maybe. Is it working?" Despite myself, I smiled. "Maybe." 20 minutes later, I found myself back in the penthouse, this time dressed in jeans and a sweater rather than my one good dress. The formal dining room had been abandoned in favor of the kitchen, where Alessandro stood at the island, sleeves rolled up, expertly flipping burgers on a built-in grill. He looked up as we entered, and something in his expression, surprise, pleasure, relief, made my breath catch. "You came," he said, echoing his words from our first dinner. "Marco can be very persuasive," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Like his father," Alessandro said with the ghost of a smile. Marco bounced on his toes, looking between us. "Can I show Ellie my room now? Please, Papa." Alessandro nodded, and Marco grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the hallway. "You have to see my toys and my books and my fish tank." As I let myself be dragged away, I glanced back at Alessandro. He was watching us, a complex emotion on his face. Something tender and vulnerable that transformed his features, making him look younger, more approachable. Marco's room was exactly what you'd expect from a wealthy child, a paradise of toys, books, and technology. But what caught my eye were the photographs on his bedside table. Marco as a baby in the arms of a beautiful woman with his same dark eyes. Alessandro with his arm around her. Both of them looking radiantly happy. "Is that your mom?" I asked gently. Marco nodded, his excitement dimming slightly. "Papa says I look like her." "You do," I agreed. "She was beautiful." "Papa doesn't like to talk about her," Marco confided. "It makes him sad. But sometimes he tells me stories about her when he tucks me in at night." The image of Alessandro, the intimidating businessman, tenderly telling his son bedtime stories about his dead wife added another layer to the complex picture forming in my mind. "You're good for him," Marco said suddenly, with a child's startling perception. He smiles more when you're around. I wasn't sure how to respond to Marco's innocent observation. Before I could formulate a reply, Alessandro appeared in the doorway. "Dinner's ready," he said, his eyes moving from me to the photographs I'd been looking at. Something vulnerable flickered across his face before his expression smoothed into its usual inscrutable mask. Marco bounced off his bed. "I'm starving!" "Go wash your hands first," Alessandro instructed, and Marco darted past him toward what I assumed was his bathroom. For a moment we stood in silence, Alessandro leaning against the doorframe, watching me. "He looks like her," I said finally, nodding toward the photograph. "Yes." His voice was tight. Her eyes, her smile, she was beautiful. Alessandro nodded once, sharply. She was everything. The raw pain in those 3 words made my heart ache. Before I could respond, Marco burst back into the room, hands extended for inspection. "All clean! Can we eat now? I'm starving!" Alessandro's expression softened as he looked at his son. "Yes, Piccolo, let's eat." Dinner was surreal. Alessandro Russo, who exuded power and danger from every pore, who I suspected was involved in something far from legal, sat across from me eating a hamburger while his son chattered about school and friends and the puppy he desperately wanted for his birthday. "You promised to think about it, Papa," Marco reminded him. "And I am thinking about it," Alessandro replied, with exaggerated patience that suggested this was a recurring conversation. "A dog is a lot of responsibility," I found myself saying. "You have to walk it and feed it and train it every single day." "I know. I'd be super responsible. I'd walk it before school and after dinner and before bed, and I'd feed it the best dog food, and I'd teach it tricks." "Please, Papa." Alessandro caught my eye over Marco's head, his lips quirking in a small smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, more accessible. My heart did a treacherous flip. "We'll see," he said, the universal parent response that wasn't quite a no. After dinner, Marco insisted on showing me his video game collection. Alessandro excused himself to take a phone call, and I found myself alone with the boy, cross-legged on his bedroom floor as he demonstrated his favorite game. "I'm really good at this one," he boasted, fingers flying over the controller. "Papa says I'm better than him, but I think he lets me win sometimes." "That's what dads do," I said with a smile. Marco's character died on screen, and he set down the controller with a sigh. "Did your dad let you win at games?" The innocent question caught me off guard. I don't really know. My dad left when I was very little." Marco's eyes widened. "He left you? Why? I don't know that either," I admitted. "I was too young to remember." "That's sad," Marco said, his face solemn. "I'd be really sad if Papa left me." "Your dad would never leave you," I assured him, touched by his concern. "He loves you more than anything." Marco nodded, accepting this as absolute truth. "He's scary sometimes when he's working, but not with me. Never with me." The casual comment sent a chill through me. Before I could probe further, Alessandro appeared in the doorway. "Bath time, Marco," he announced. Marco groaned but stood obediently. "Will you still be here when I'm done, Ellie?" I glanced at Alessandro, uncertain. Ellie and I will be talking in the living room," Alessandro said. "You can say goodnight before bed." Satisfied, Marco disappeared into the bathroom. Alessandro turned to me. "Join me for a drink?" I nodded, following him back to the living room. The lights of Chicago glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a carpet of stars beneath us. Alessandro poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and handed one to me. "Scotch," he explained. 30-year-old Macallan. I took a small sip, the liquid burning a path down my throat. "It's good," I said, though I couldn't tell the difference between this and the cheap bourbon my mother used to drink. Alessandro moved to the windows, looking out over the city. "You're good with him," he said after a moment. "With Marco. He likes you." "He's a great kid," I said sincerely. "You've done a good job with him." Alessandro turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I've tried. It hasn't been easy, raising him alone." "No, I imagine not." I hesitated. then added, especially with your work. A shadow crossed his face. What do you think my work is, Ellie? I set down my glass, suddenly nervous. You said import, export, and you didn't believe me. I met his gaze steadily. Should I? The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been admiration. You're perceptive, and braver than most, or just foolish, I murmured. Alessandro stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and subtle. What did Marco tell you? Nothing specific. Just that you can be scary when you're working. He nodded, as if this confirmed something. I've tried to shield him from that side of my life. What side is that exactly? Alessandro studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. I'm what you might call a problem solver, he said finally. For certain enterprises, illegal enterprises, I clarified, my heart pounding. The line between legal and illegal is often blurrier than most people realize. His voice was soft but matter-of-fact. I operate in the gray areas. You're in the Mafia, I said bluntly, giving voice to the suspicion that had been growing since our first meeting. Alessandro didn't flinch. That's a simplistic term, but not entirely inaccurate. I should have been terrified. I should have walked out right then, but something held me in place. A curiosity, a fascination I couldn't deny. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you asked. He moved closer still, and because I find myself unable to lie to you. What do you want from me, Alessandro? I want to see you again, and again after that. Why? There must be dozens of beautiful, wealthy women who would jump at the chance to be with you. Women from your world who understand it. Yes, he agreed, and every one of them wants something from me. My money, my power, my connections. His eyes held mine, intense and uncompromising. You're the first woman in a very long time who has looked at me and seen a man, not a resource to be exploited. I see a dangerous man, I countered. Yes, he acknowledged, and yet you're still here. Before I could respond, the patter of small feet announced Marco's arrival, freshly bathed and pajama-clad. I'm ready for bed, Papa, he announced, then turned to me with a hopeful expression. Will you come read me a story, Ellie? Please? I looked to Alessandro, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Just one, I agreed. Marco beamed, grabbing my hand and pulling me back to his room. I sat on the edge of his bed as he selected a book from his shelf, a worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. This was my favorite when I was little, I told him, surprised. It's my favorite too, Marco exclaimed, snuggling under his covers. Mama used to read it to me, Papa says. My heart squeezed. I opened the book and began to read, aware of Alessandro watching from the doorway, his expression softening as Marco's eyes grew heavy. By the time I finished, Marco was asleep, his dark lashes fanned against his cheeks. I gently closed the book and stood, adjusting his covers. You're a natural, Alessandro said softly as we left the room, closing the door halfway. I always wanted children, I admitted as we walked back to the living room. Before everything fell apart with David, we talked about having a family. The ex-boyfriend who left you with his debts, Alessandro clarified, his voice hardening. You really did your homework on me, didn't you? As I said, I like to know who I'm dealing with. We reached the living room, and I turned to face him. I should go. It's getting late, and I have the early shift tomorrow, at the coffee shop, Alessandro said with a nod, though you don't have to work there anymore. Or at the diner. Your debts are cleared. I stiffened. I still need to pay rent, buy groceries. I could... No, I interrupted firmly. You've done enough. More than enough. Alessandro studied me, that hint of admiration back in his eyes. Most people would take advantage. I'm not most people. No, he agreed softly. You're not. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my cheek. That's what fascinates me. My breath caught at his touch. I knew I should step back, maintain some distance, but I found myself frozen in place, caught in the gravity of his gaze. Have dinner with me again, he said, his voice low. Friday night. Somewhere public, if that makes you more comfortable. I hesitated, reason warring with desire. Alessandro, I don't think... One more dinner, he pressed. If you still have doubts after that, I won't bother you again. I searched his face, looking for deceit, for manipulation. All I saw was intensity and something that might have been vulnerability. Friday, I agreed finally. But not because of what you did with my debts. That doesn't obligate me to you. I know. His fingers trailed down my cheek, feather light. That's precisely why I want you there. The car took me home in silence, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. Alessandro Russo was a criminal. He'd all but admitted it. Getting involved with him was madness. And yet, the memory of his touch lingered on my skin, and the image of him with Marco showed a side of him that complicated the dangerous picture. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the unfamiliar car parked across from my apartment building. Didn't register the figures watching from the shadows. Not until the next morning, when everything changed. I woke early, as usual, and went through my morning routine on autopilot. It wasn't until I opened my front door, ready to leave for my shift, that I realized something was wrong. One of Alessandro's security men stood outside my apartment, his expression grim. "Ms. Foster," he said with a slight inclination of his head. "Mr. Russo sent me to escort you to work today." "I don't need an escort," I said, confused. "I've been getting to work on my own for years." The man's face remained impassive. "It's not a request, ma'am." A chill ran down my spine. "What's going on?" "It's not my place to say. If you'll come with me, please." I hesitated, then nodded, locking my door behind me. The security man led me to the now familiar black car. As we drove, I noticed him checking the mirrors frequently, his posture tense. "You're scaring me," I said after several minutes of silence. "Please, tell me what's happening." The man glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Russo will explain everything. I'm supposed to be at work in 20 minutes. The coffee shop. You've been called in sick." My unease deepened. "By who?" "Mr. Russo." "He can't just—" I began, then stopped, as I realized we were heading toward the Gold Coast. "Where are we going? This isn't the way to the coffee shop. Mr. Russo is waiting for you at his home." I sat back, a mixture of irritation and fear churning in my stomach. When we arrived at the now familiar building, the security man escorted me directly to the elevator. Alessandro was waiting in the penthouse, pacing the living room, his face a mask of controlled fury. He looked up as I entered, relief flickering briefly across his features, before his expression hardened again. "What's going on?" I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. "You can't just summon me like this. I have a job." "Someone was watching your apartment last night," Alessandro cut in, his voice tight. "Not my men. Someone else." Block 5. My anger evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. "What do you mean, someone was watching my apartment?" Alessandro moved to the windows, his reflection superimposed over Chicago's skyline. "After I had you dropped off last night, one of my security team noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked across from your building, 2 men inside, watching your window. Maybe they were waiting for someone else," I suggested, though even I didn't believe it. Alessandro turned to face me, his expression grim. "They weren't." My man recognized one of them, Vittorio Calabrese, who works for Antonio Bianchi. The names meant nothing to me. Who's Antonio Bianchi? A muscle ticked in Alessandro's jaw. A rival. Someone who would very much like to see me diminished. "And what does that have to do with me?" Alessandro's eyes met mine, dark and intense. "They saw you with me, with Marco. They think you're important to me." "I'm not," I said automatically, then regretted it when something like pain flashed across his face. "Whether you are or not is irrelevant," he said, his voice controlled. "They believe you are, which makes you a target. A way to get to me." I sank onto the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. This can't be happening. Alessandro knelt before me, taking my hands in his. His touch was warm, steadying. "I'm sorry, Ellie. I never intended to put you at risk." "I should have been more careful. What happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "You'll stay here, where it's safe, until we can neutralize the threat." I pulled my hands from his. "I can't just move in with you. I have a job. A life. A life that's in danger because of me," Alessandro said, his voice hardening. This isn't a request, Ellie. Bianchi's men don't make idle threats. If they've identified you as someone I care about, they won't hesitate to use you against me. Someone you care about, I repeated, the words hanging between us. Is that what I am? Alessandro stood, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of agitation. What I feel for you is complicated, unexpected. He met my eyes again. But yes, I care about you. More than I should, perhaps. I felt as if the ground was shifting beneath me. I barely know you, yet here you are, he said softly. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. I have business to attend to. Marco is at school, secure, with extra guards. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rossi, will show you to a guest room. Please make yourself comfortable. We'll talk more this evening. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my churning thoughts and a growing sense that my life had veered irrevocably off course. Mrs. Rossi, a plump, motherly Italian woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, showed me to a guest suite larger than my entire apartment. She provided fresh clothes. How Alessandro had guessed my size so accurately, I didn't want to know, and assured me that she was available if I needed anything. Left alone, I paced the luxurious room, feeling like a prisoner despite the gilded cage. I tried calling my manager at the coffee shop to explain my absence, only to be told that Mr. Russo's assistant had already arranged for me to take a week of paid leave for family emergency. The same was true for the diner. My life was being rearranged without my consent, and the powerlessness of it made me seethe. By the time Alessandro returned that evening, my fear had crystallized into anger. He found me in the living room, staring out at the city lights, arms crossed defensively. You had no right, I said without turning around. No right to make decisions about my life. I heard him sigh behind me. You're right. I should have consulted you, but I needed to act quickly to ensure your safety. My safety, I repeated, finally facing him. From a threat I wouldn't even be facing if I hadn't helped Marco that night. Alessandro flinched slightly, and I immediately regretted my words. I'm sorry, I said, deflating. I don't regret helping Marco. I could never regret that. I'm scared, Alessandro. This is your world, not mine. I don't know how to navigate it. His expression softened. I know. And I'm sorry you've been pulled into it. He moved closer, cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal. I've spoken with my security team. The situation is complicated, but manageable. Bianchi is making a play for territory that has belonged to my family for generations. Using you would be a leverage point. Using me how? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Alessandro's expression darkened. Bianchi is not known for his subtlety or mercy. He would hurt you to hurt me. A chill ran down my spine. And what would you do if he hurt me? Alessandro's eyes met mine, and in them I saw something cold and deadly. Everything necessary to ensure he never hurt anyone again. The casual way he spoke of violence should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a perverse sense of security in his ruthlessness, a certainty that he would indeed protect what was his. The realization that I was beginning to think like him, to accept his world, frightened me more than any external threat. This isn't me, I said, my voice breaking. This isn't my life. Violence and threats and security details. I'm just Ellie, a waitress who reads too much and can barely pay her rent. Alessandro reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek with unexpected tenderness. You've never been just anything, Ellie. From the moment you helped Marco, you proved you were extraordinary. I leaned into his touch despite myself. What happens now? Now, he said, his thumb tracing my jawline. My men are handling the situation. In the meantime, you stay here, where I can protect you. For how long? Until it's safe. His eyes held mine, intense and unyielding. I won't risk your life, Ellie, not for anything. The days that followed settled into a strange routine. I spent mornings with Mrs. Rossi, who took a grandmotherly liking to me and taught me to make proper Italian coffee and pasta from scratch. Afternoons were spent reading in the penthouse's extensive library, or helping Marco with his homework when he returned from school. Evenings were the most surreal. Dinners with Alessandro and Marco, like some bizarre parody of family life. Alessandro was often absent during the day, handling his business, but he always returned for dinner, always asked about my day with genuine interest, always watched me with those intense dark eyes that seemed to see right through me. And each night, he walked me to my door, his fingers brushing mine in a touch that grew more electric each time. Yet he never pressed for more. The restraint only made the tension between us more acute, a tightly wound spring waiting to release. A week passed this way, then another. My fear gradually gave way to a strange contentment, a comfort in the routine we'd established. Marco's unguarded affection and Alessandro's more complex attention filled spaces in me I hadn't realized were empty. It was during the third week that everything changed. I woke in the middle of the night to shouting, Alessandro's voice, harsh with command, and others I didn't recognize. I crept to my door, opening it a crack to peer out into the hallway. Alessandro stood at the end of the corridor, his back to me, speaking rapidly in Italian to two of his security men. The tension in his posture was unmistakable. "Make sure Marco's guards are doubled," he said, switching to English. "No one gets near him, understood? And get the car ready. We're leaving in 10 minutes. The men nodded and hurried away. Alessandro turned, and I quickly closed my door, but not before he saw me. A soft knock came moments later. I opened the door to find him standing there, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What's happening?" I asked, clutching my robe tighter around me. "Bianchi has made his move," Alessandro said, his voice tight. "I need to handle it personally." Fear clutched at my heart. "Is it dangerous?" The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Everything in my life is dangerous, Ellie." He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Stay with Marco. Mrs. Rossi will be with you both. Extra security is already in place." "Alessandro," I said, catching his hand before he could withdraw it. "Be careful." Something flared in his eyes, surprise, warmth, desire. "I will." He leaned forward, his lips brushing my forehead in a touch so gentle it made my heart ache. Then he was gone, leaving only the lingering warmth of his touch and the scent of his cologne. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did Marco, who appeared at my door an hour later, frightened by the unusual activity in the penthouse. I let him crawl into bed beside me, his small body curled trustingly against mine as I read to him until his breathing finally evened out in sleep. Morning came with no word from Alessandro. Then afternoon. By evening, even Mrs. Rossi's reassuring smile seemed strained. When Marco asked for the third time when his father would be home, I saw real worry flash across her weathered face. "Soon, Piccolo," she said, ruffling his hair. Soon. It was past midnight when we finally heard the elevator doors open. Marco had long since been put to bed, and I sat alone in the living room, unable to sleep, a book open but unread in my lap. I looked up as Alessandro entered, and my heart stuttered. He was alive, but barely looked it. Blood stained his once immaculate shirt. A cut above his eye was hastily bandaged, and he moved with the careful precision of someone managing significant pain. "My God," I breathed, rushing to his side. "What happened? Should I call a doctor?" "It's done," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Bianchi won't be a problem anymore." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. "You're hurt," I said instead, guiding him to the couch. "I've had worse." His eyes never left my face, drinking me in as if memorizing every feature. "You stayed." Of course I stayed. Marco needed me. I hesitated, then added softly, "I was worried about you." Alessandro reached out, his hand finding mine. "I've been thinking about what you said, about this not being your life, your world." His thumb traced circles on my palm, sending shivers up my arm. "You were right. I had no right to drag you into this." A hollow feeling opened in my chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're free to go. Bianchi is no longer a threat. You can return to your life, your jobs. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially, but you don't have to stay here, with us, with me." He was offering me what I'd wanted from the beginning, my freedom, my normal life back. So why did it feel like he was tearing something essential from me? "And if I want to stay?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Alessandro went still, his eyes searching mine. "Do you?" I thought of my tiny apartment, my exhausting jobs, the loneliness that had been my constant companion since my mother died. Then I thought of Marco's laughter, Mrs. Rossi's warmth, the way Alessandro looked at me as if I were precious beyond measure. "I don't know what this is between us," I said honestly. "It's fast and complicated and probably insane. You're dangerous, Alessandro. Your life is dangerous. But these weeks with you and Marco, I've felt more alive, more myself, than I have in years." Alessandro's hand tightened on mine. "I can't promise you safety, Ellie. Not completely. My world will always have risks, I know. But I can promise you this," he continued, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "As long as I breathe, I will protect you. You and Marco are everything to me now." He pulled me toward him, his free hand cupping my face with exquisite tenderness. "Stay," he murmured. "Not as a guest, not out of obligation. Stay because you want to." In answer, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question, then deepened into something more urgent, more demanding. I felt the barriers I'd built around my heart crumble, swept away by the tide of emotion I could no longer deny. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, Alessandro rested his forehead against mine. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll stay." 6 months later, Marco got his puppy, a white terrier with a heart-shaped brown spot on its back, just like the one that had led him to get lost that fateful night. We named her Destiny, which made Alessandro roll his eyes but smile that rare, genuine smile that still made my heart race. Our life wasn't perfect. Alessandro's business still took him away sometimes, still put him in danger that made me sick with worry. But he was making changes, gradually shifting toward legitimate enterprises, building something that could one day be Marco's legacy, without the shadows that had defined his own inheritance. And on quiet evenings, when Marco was asleep and the city twinkled below us, Alessandro would hold me close and whisper promises against my skin, of love, of protection, of a future I never could have imagined that cold October night when I heard a child crying in an alley. I had helped a lost boy find his home, never knowing his father was a ruthless mafia boss. Now, against all odds, I had found my home too, with them.